All you.
So I'm going to start off by going through all of the hard equipment that you'll need, followed by the food prep that you're going to need for tonight's dish, which is chicken paillard. It's a simple restaurant-style dish where it's a piece of chicken that's cut thin, pounded, pan-seared, and then placed on a plate with a tossed salad across the top of it. It's pretty classic. It's pretty simple for people to do, and it's on the less expensive side. And I don't know about too many people out there, but I personally have been eating a whole lot of carbs through most of COVID, and making meals that have less carbs in them right now is definitely better for me physically, I think is a nice way of saying it. But yeah, so we can start off with that. One of the things you're gonna need is you're gonna need a peeler, some sort of a bowl, metal bowl, glass, ceramic, any of those kind of work. Sautee pan, pair of tongs, a either rolling pin, a bottle of wine that's hopefully empty. When it's full, it's a little bit harder to pound with, or a meat mallet. And when you go to use the meat mallet to pound the chicken, you don't want to use the spiky side. If you use the spiky side, it'll shred the chicken and you'll just end up with a little pile of chicken goop. And if you're cooking the vegetarian version of this with, say, tofu, I don't recommend pounding it unless you have a backup piece of tofu and you just want to get some frustrations out. But yeah, so we'll get more into that when we get there. The other stuff you're going to need is either a piece of parchment or a Ziploc bag or some plastic wrap. That's going to be to put over the chicken. And I'll talk more of that also when we get there. Salt, pepper, and this is pretty much for the hard goods, all you need for the entree. We can talk about the hard goods for the dressing, which I set right over here. And if we have any issues with the sound at all throughout this, just please speak up and I'll try to remedy that. So for the dressing, you're going to need another bowl, a measuring cup. Mine already has the vinegar in it. Some sort of olive oil, some Dijon, some sort of dried oregano, Italian seasoning, something along that lines, a whisk, and a spoon, just for getting the mustard. So we have that. And now we're going to get on to the ingredients for the entree, which you are going to need your arugula, carrot. I have a purple carrot. Any colored carrot works, but I actually really just like the color profile of the purple because it usually has like a little yellow orange in the middle of it. So it just adds some brightness to it. Cucumber. I said red pepper. I have a green because it just came out of my garden like 30 minutes ago, and I'm super amped about that. And I can't remember if I put it in there, but some Parmesan for toppings if you want, and then anything else you would normally put in a salad you can also have. You know, if you have some cherry tomatoes or radishes or, you know, pretty much any of that kind of stuff, you can just add that in with the salad also. That part's pretty much like, there's no hard description on how you should do it. It's whatever you like. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? Oh yeah, and chicken or tofu. You're gonna need one chicken breast, which I left in the fridge. Just a regular chicken breast. And if you have tofu, what I usually do is I'll take some tamari or some liquid aminos and I'll spritz both sides of it down while I get the rest of the stuff together so it'll soak in. If it's too wet when you go to add it to your pan with the oil in it, it'll spatter, and potentially burn you. But some people like to live on the edge and they do it anyways. But that's all up to you. Let's see if I can do that real quick. So while we go through the rest of this, it's all nice and happy. I do this predominantly because tofu has, if anybody who has had it knows, very, very little flavor to it. And so any little bit helps that you can do. And I'm just going to set this off to the side to soak that up while we do the rest of this stuff. And I'm going to place my chicken back in the fridge for now. Okay, so we're going to start off with the dressing. Now, with the dressing, we're just going to do a simple balsamic dressing. You can use any sort of vinegar in this. If you have rice wine or cider, just regular vinegar. It doesn't have as much flavor, but it has that tanginess to it. I have balsamic vinegar in here. The measurement that you're going to want is 1/4 of a cup of balsamic vinegar. And then you're going to do a 1 part to 2 parts. So if you're adding a 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar, you're going to want to add 1/2 cup of olive oil. So you're going to measure it out and hold it to the side. And this container takes a while to pour from.
Austin, can you just say that ratio for me one more time?
Yep. I'm doing a 1/4 cup of vinegar to 1/2 cup of olive oil. So it's 1/3 to 2/3.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Let's see. All right, so what you're going to want to do is take your vinegar, pour it into your bowl, and then you're going to take your oregano or dried Italian seasoning, and you're going to want probably about a tablespoon, approximately. It doesn't have to be exact. And keep an eye out. Mine has some rosemary in it, and sometimes they're not chunked up, so you have a really big piece of rosemary floating around, and nobody wants to chew down on a really big chunk of dried rosemary. The other thing you're going to want to add is probably a teaspoon of mustard. I'm using Dijon. Any brown or Dijon mustard will work. Yellow works in a pinch, just doesn't have the flavor there. Okay. You're also going to want to add a couple of dashes of pepper and a pinch of salt. I'm just using coarse kosher salt because that's what I've gotten used to. If you have a salt shaker, your quantity of salt might look like a little less because it's ground finer. The kosher salt is ground coarser, so it holds more air in between the crystals, so the volume is actually slightly larger. So let's see, we have our oregano in there, we have our salt, our pepper, our Dijon, our oil. So you're going to want to give that a little bit of a stir so it's all mixed together. You're going to want to just give it a whisk until the Dijon separates into it and you don't have big chunks of Dijon floating around. And the next step is you're going to take your olive oil and you're going to gradually pour it in to your vinegar mix. Now, while you're going to want to do it slow, and that will help make it thick and creamy. Now, the reason why we added the mustard in there is for flavor, and also it helps emulsify the vinegar and the olive oil together, so it's less likely to separate. And as soon as I finish with mine, I'll hold it up so you guys can get an idea of what it looks like. And if it looks like you have oil pooling on top and you need to pour a little slower, do that. Now, if you pour it slow enough and it emulsifies the right way, that won't separate. That'll stay mixed together for, the next week. We're making a small batch, so you probably won't have that much left over, but if you wanted to make a bigger batch on your own after this, feel free. Let's get this up here so people can see that a little bit. Yeah. So that's what you're looking for. It's a little thick and creamy. If you're having a hard time getting it to emulsify together, add a little bit more mustard. That'll help bring stuff together so it's a little bit smoother, which I am going to do because my estimations were off a little tiny bit. And that's better. Now I'm going to grab a second spoon so I can taste this and make sure I have enough salt and spice in there. You're not going to want a lot because it's going to be tart. That's good. I like that. All right, so now that we're done with the dressing, we're going to set the dressing to the side because we're going to come back to that in a little bit. And as we go along, you're going to want to, clean off your station as we finish things because it's difficult to cook in a really dirty, messy station. It's a lot easier to do it. And sinks are there just to pile dishes in. And if you're lucky enough, you have somebody who comes behind you and does the dishes. It's not always true, but if you're lucky, maybe. But anyways, you can just leave them there and do them after dinner. They'll be perfectly fine.
That's not a subtle hint.
My wife was saying it's not a subtle hint that, that her doing the dishes. But anyways, we'll carry on from there. So you're going to want your large bowl for your salad. Set that there. And grab some of your veggies, cucumber, carrot, pepper. So I have pre-washed all of my veggies. If you got a Euro cuke like this one, you're going to want to make sure that you take the wrap off. I just give them a quick rinse. They're supposedly pre-washed. If you have a regular cucumber from the grocery store that's not wrapped like that, I suggest peeling the skin off. A lot of them are waxed to kind of preserve it so it stays colorful and nice and so on and so forth. I like the Euro cukes because you can leave the skin on. It's a nice little color texture, adds a little bit more crunch. But yes, we'll start with the carrot. Now that I talked about the cucumber, we'll start with the carrot, and you're just going to want to peel your carrot. And the interesting thing about peelers is if you have to do a lot of peeling, one carrot's not really that big of a deal. But peelers have 2 blades on them. And if you bring it down and back up without taking it off and you turn it a little bit each time, that's half the work because you're already moving your hand up and down anyways. It only really makes a big difference when you're peeling like 20, 30 pounds of carrots, which I do. 1 carrot, it's not that big of a deal. But it's just a nice little trick to know. Plus your peeler uses both blades so it doesn't dull as quick going along. And let's see. Grab a little bowl. Put all my veggie scraps in for my chickens. There we go. So with your carrot, you're going to want to cut on a little bit of a bias and probably about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now this is the color of the purple carrot. I really like it because it's got that nice yellow middle and the bright purple outside. It just adds a little bit of extra color and flavor to the dish. And when it comes down to figuring out how much to do, I usually go with about 1 inch of carrot per person when you're cutting it. So you're going to want to thin cut probably about 2 inches if you're making it for 2, and place that into your bowl as soon as you're done with that. And then we'll move on to the next thing. And the reason I cut on a bias is it gives a better cross section of that nice color transition. It also makes the little slices look a bit bigger. They just look nicer on the plate when you're done. And if you like a lot of carrot and you want to add a little bit more, feel free. This part is very free flowing and you can do most of what you want to it. All right, so that's my carrot. I use about the same measurements on a cucumber, so about an inch per person. I always cut the little tip off because it's a little woody tiny piece on there. And you're going to want to do about the same thickness, if not a tiny bit more on your cucumber. If you cut them too thin, they just kind of stick to the lettuce and blend in, and you don't really notice them, and you don't get the flavor and the crunch that you're looking for from the cucumber. And when I cut it, I always cut the cucumber in half first, because it's really difficult to cut something that's rolling around on your cutting board. You're going to want to cut something that's a little bit flat, has more stability, it's easier to work with. And I do recommend most people, look at what you're cutting when you're going to cut. We had a lot of training in college of not looking where we cut, and so we could get used to it. And when you're done cutting all of that, just throw that on into your bowl. Try to break it apart a little bit with your fingers. There we go. And we're going to want to add some of the pepper. Now, I just cut along the edge like that. I'm not going to use the whole pepper. I'm just using like roughly one side per person. The rest of it's going to go back in the fridge to do a dish with later on. When I'm doing a salad, I try to use the tip of your knife and take out the little white bit. It's kind of bitter. It adds just kind of that to it. It'll take away from the sweetness of the pepper. And about the same size on the pepper, you're going for about that. And we'll just slice up one side of the pepper per person. There we go. Add that into our bowl. I like a lot of toppings on my salad. It gives it a little bit more substance. When you're using that as your primary part of the dinner, it just makes it feel like you're eating something a little bit more hefty, filling. And it just makes other people who are eating the salad a little bit happier too. That's side. All right, so we have our veggies cut up. I was going to add some tomatoes to mine. If you're adding grape tomatoes for the future, I usually do 3 to 4 tomatoes per person. I just happen to have 7 tomatoes left of a package, and don't want them to go bad. So I figure I'd use them. All right. And I cut all of mine in half because there's nothing worse than having a dressing covered cherry tomato roll across the table and into somebody's lap or your lap and like get dressing all over you. It's a mess. So next we'll step into the arugula. If you have arugula that you got from a local farm or you grew or harvested yourself, you're going to want to make sure you wash it a few times. I'm using the Olivia Organics one. It's triple washed, and I haven't had an issue with any sort of grit or anything on it. And as far as portions go, you're going to want a pretty hefty handful, and keep an eye out for little sprigs of like grass or something in there. But you're going to want like a pretty hefty handful per person. And this is about what I do. And you're going to want to add both of those to the bowl. And now that we have all of our stuff cut, prepared for the salad, we can take and put all of our remaining veggies, the rest of the cucumber, the pepper, and so on and so forth, and set that in the fridge so it doesn't go bad. And then when we get to the chicken part, we don't make a mess of it. How's everyone doing? Good. All right. So the next step, now that you have your salad pretty much made, is to take a little bit of your dressing and drizzle some of your dressing on there. You're not going to want to add a lot. You're just going to add a little so it'll start to soak into the veggies and so on and so forth that you have in there. Take your tongs, just give it a little bit of a toss. And if you think you need to add a little bit more after you're tossing it, feel free. It's always easier to add more. It's kind of difficult / impossible to take it away. All right, so that's looking good. Now, we're gonna wanna set that to the side because the next step is the chicken. And we don't wanna get chicken bits in our salad. So let's clear everything off over here. Salt, pepper. Don't need the peeler anymore. That looks perfect. Okay, so for the next part, we're gonna work on pounding the chicken. And what I'm gonna suggest is everybody, if you have one lying around the kitchen, you put a towel underneath your cutting board. Because what's going to happen is that's going to help muffle the sound of you whamming something against your chicken really hard. And the other thing is if you've had a stressful day, this is a great dish to make because you get to work out a lot of that, you know, on the chicken. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our cutting board, put our towel underneath it, and grab our chicken. I just realized, out of habit from working in a commercial kitchen, I usually grab gloves every time I work with a raw meat, just because it helps limit the chances of cross-contamination in a mass kitchen. At home, you don't necessarily need to do it, but for me, it's just kind of routine that I have built in. If you have them, they're great. If you don't, that's okay. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to take your chicken and set it on your cutting board. And then you're going to notice that you have all these little fatty bits around the outside of your chicken. And you're just going to want to trim all of that off because if you leave them on when you go to saute the chicken afterwards, it will spatter, sputter, and it's not always the most fun to try to chew on while you're eating. I'm just going to give your chicken a good look over. You're going to be
Just I got a question for you.
Yes.
Skin, leave it on or take it off?
Take it off.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. You're going to want just plain meat. One thing you're going to want to do is your chicken breast is usually shaped like this. Right up and in here is where the wing joint is. And sometimes when you get processed chicken like this, there's a little bit of cartilage that hangs out in here. That's kind of not fun to chew on or get in your plate. So just pay attention if you see it there. Just cut it out and be very careful of your fingers. You don't want to cut those. It's not fun. All right. So now that we have that, all of that, I like to cut from the fat side of the chicken breast down to the skinnier side. And what you're looking to do, I'll take my glove off because it's all poofy, is you're going to want to cut it so it's about this thick. So somewhere between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, closer to 1/4 inch, probably about 1/3 inch. Because you're going to pound it out a little bit more than that. But if you start out too thick, it doesn't go so well when you're trying to pound. You just end up tearing it apart. And for a chicken breast this size, I usually get about 2 full portions and 1 smaller portion. And if you're very careful of your knife. Keep your hand and your fingers up while you're setting your knife up like that. You should be able to get pretty consistently a nice thin piece of chicken. Now, sometimes you'll get a chicken breast that will be kind of tore up a little bit on the underside. When you go to cut it, it's going to fall apart a little bit. That's okay. We can work with that. It's going to be an easy fix. So I am going to set my chicken back in my pan. Right. And the next thing you're going to want to do is grab your piece of parchment or plastic bag, saran wrap, any of that kind of stuff that you're working with. I chose parchment because it's easier to work with for me. So the other thing you're going to need is a little bit of oil. So you're going to want some of your olive oil on whatever you're using to pound out. The reason is when you go to pound your chicken out, it's going to want to stick to the parchment paper. And doing this will help keep that from happening. Smooth that out. You want to try to oil both parts of the inside of the parchment paper. Right. So you're going to want to start with, I usually start with just 2 pieces. And here's the fun part. Now, when you're pounding out your chicken and you're trying to use a wine bottle, because that's an option, you have to be careful not to pound too hard because you might break the wine bottle and then you got to start all over. That's not necessarily that much fun. But what you're looking for is you're trying to pound your piece of chicken so it's closer to 1/8 of an inch. And you want to try to do it evenly so your chicken cooks evenly. If like one side is thicker than the other, this side is going to dry out before this side finishes cooking. And then you're going to have a tough, dry piece of your chicken while the other part of it is nice and moist. Yeah, I think we are ready. Pardon the dog toy noise. She thinks it's playtime. All right. So while you're pounding your chicken, you're going to want to feel it right as you go along. Because you will be able to notice if you're using a rolling pin or a wine bottle, you'll have peaks and valleys. And you want to try to even those out so it's as smooth as possible. If you're using a flat meat mallet, that's a lot easier to do because you don't have the rockiness of it. And the other thing is you want to be a little bit cautious about how big you pound out your chicken, because if it's bigger than the inside of your saute pan, this part, it's very difficult to cook and it'll end up burning along the edge while the middle is still cooking. So the nice thing about putting it between 2 pieces of parchment, 2 pieces of plastic wrap, whatever you have it between, is when you're pounding it, it stops the little bits from flying out. So you don't end up with chicken across your kitchen as much as you might necessarily. And it also stops it from sticking to your whatever you're pounding it with. I do suggest washing it afterwards because you can't guarantee that you're 100% not having any chicken on this. But it helps cut down on all of that kind of stuff. How's everybody doing? Do we have any questions so far? Good? Awesome. So when you're almost done pounding, which I am, you're gonna wanna turn your Sautee pan on. Hopefully, there we go. I do a medium-low heat because I'm using olive oil. Olive oil has a low smoke point, which means if you heat it on a higher heat, it'll smoke. It could touch off your smoke detector. I had to take mine down because I did that yesterday. If you're using canola oil, that has a higher smoke point, so you can hold it on to a higher heat. The nice thing about that is you'll get a browner crust to the outside of your chicken while it cooks. But if you have health concerns, because I know some people are concerned about using canola oil, the olive oil works perfectly fine. You can substitute coconut oil, pretty much most oils. You just have to be cautious. A lot of them have lower smoke points than canola oil.
Justin, I'm working with tofu. Is there a specific way I should be cutting it?
I cut mine. I knew I left it out for a reason. I cut mine probably about 1/2 inch thick.
Perfect.
Yep. Go. That's nice and even. Perfect. All right, so we're going to put the rolling pin in the sink. The knife over there. So when you're seasoning things, and while our pan's heating up, we'll season one side of the chicken. You want to season from up high. Now the reason for that is if you season down low, you're going to get a very narrow line of salt, pepper, whatever you're seasoning with. If you season from up high, you'll end up getting a more evenly dispersed salt crust to the outside of whatever you're cooking or seasoning if you're not using a lot of it. And the other thing is if you're using a shaker, don't do the normal like dash forward because you end up with pepper in just like little areas. If you swish it back and forth, you'll get an even covering with this with your pepper shaker. All right. I am gonna move you guys over to the stove so we can pay attention to this part of it. Oops. Come on, Ebs. You gotta move. That's where the camera goes.
Justin, I just got to say, your rolling setup is awesome over there. That rolling camera.
I actually just kind of dragged it. I mean, no, I have a really fancy rolling setup. It's like one of those leveling automatic ones. So nice. Okay, so now that our pan has been heating up a little bit, you're going to want to add about a tablespoon of oil. How does that look? Okay, the lighting is good. That's what I was worried about. So you'll notice if you left your pan on for a little too long, because I talked a little longer than I planned on, it smokes a little bit. And at home, you could turn on your exhaust fan or any of that kind of thing that is above your stove. Because of audio, I can't do that here, but I do recommend that for at home. So with tofu or chicken, what you're going to do is when you set it in your pan, you're going to want to set it away from you. And I'll show you what I mean. So there's your pan, and you want to lean it away from you. That way, if it spatters, it's going to go up against your wall and not in your face. When I was first learning to cook, I made that experience and had a grease burn across my face for about a week. So you're going to want to season the other side of the tofu or chicken, whatever you're working with. And you're going to see it already in my pan with the chicken that it's starting to turn white around the edge. That means it's cooking. And while it's cooking, you're going to want to grab a plate. Keep it over by the burner, because if you're cooking more than one piece of chicken, you're going to want to keep it near the stove, because that's the warmest part of the kitchen right now. And that'll keep that piece warm during the dinner, you know, while the other piece is cooking and getting ready to plate. All right. So I'm going to hold this up a little bit and see if you guys can see what I see. So right up around here, you'll see that it's starting to turn white. Now, when it gets to be about 1/8 of an inch thick around the edge, that's when you're going to want to get ready to flip it, because you're looking for that nice coloring on the bottom. And again, when you flip it away from you. And you'll notice that one of the positive things about this dish is how quickly it cooks. And I apologize if the audio is a little distorted. The phone tries to filter out the sizzling, and it'll distort my voice a little bit in the process. Now, to tell that your chicken is done, you can push on it with your tongs, and you're looking for it to feel similar to the tip of your finger. So it'll be firm, but still a little tender. I have built up a tolerance in my hand for heat, and know the feeling a little bit better with my fingertips than I do with a pair of tongs, but we're looking good. And you're gonna base the doneness off of the thickest piece if it's not even. Give that a little bit of a flip, see how the other side looks. Oh, perfect. All right. We're gonna set that piece on the plate. And I'm going to do a piece of tofu real quick. What's that? Oh, yeah. I'm going to add a little bit more oil to this pan. If you're cooking vegetarian, you're going to want to use a cleaner pan. I only happen to have one nice Sautee pan in the kitchen, so I'm just going to do both in that.
Hey, Justin, quick question.
Yes.
Salt and pepper, we only did one side, or were we supposed to do both sides?
Oh, sorry. When you lay your chicken in the pan, salt and pepper side down, you're going to want to season the other side. If you missed that, it's completely okay. You can add it a little bit after. And we're going to add some dressing to the chicken when we plate it, or tofu anyways. So you're okay. Add the tofu, and the same thing with tofu. When you're adding tofu, especially if it's been soaked or sprayed or anything like that, the little droplets that come off it are gonna want to batter up and give you some pretty nasty grease. So with the tofu, you're looking to heat it all the way through, and you're trying to get a little bit of that brownness, that caramel coloring to the outside. That way it has a little bit of texture to it, and it has that nice like brown pan flavor on it. And with the tofu, you're gonna want to use a spatula, because sometimes it'll tear on you. And obviously, the softer the tofu you're working with, the more gentle you have to be while using it. Now, if I was doing this at work, I'd have a whole separate like little station set up to the side for the vegetarian dishes. But considering I only have one saute pan, and you guys probably don't want to watch me stop, scrub it down, and then cook again, and then scrub it down, and then cook again, I figured that it would be all right for this presentation. And the same thing with your tofu, just like your chicken. If you're cooking for more than one person, you might not necessarily be able to get it all in the pan at once. So you're going to want to have a little plate off to the side that you can set your browned pieces of tofu on while you cook some more. And if you notice it's starting to stick a little bit more than you would like, you can add a little tiny bit more oil. Same thing with the chicken. Feel free in between portions to add, you know, like teaspoon or so of oil to help keep everything a little bit smoother.
Hey, Justin,
Yes.
I gotta cut out because I have to teach in 5 minutes, but I'm gonna do the chicken. I'm gonna put the salad on top, and then I'm gonna watch the rest of the video to see if I got it right. So
That is exactly what you're supposed to do.
very good.
And a quick tip, John.
Yeah.
When you're doing your salad, do
Yeah.
your salad across,
Okay.
you know, kind of like this.
Mhm.
That way you can see the little bits of brown chicken on the edges, because you want people to enjoy your hard work. And that'll look really pretty also with the contrasting in colors.
Great. Excellent. Hey, this has been awesome. I wish I could stay, but I gotta teach. So
That's okay, I understand.
I know.
Thanks
Bye.
so
all.
much, John. See you later.
I'm gonna get my last piece of chicken going, and I'm gonna move you over so we can start working on the cleanup. All right, Ed, you gotta move. Come on, pup. She's kind of stubborn. Doesn't necessarily enjoy getting out of people's way. All right. Salt. Little pepper. So when you're done cooking your chicken, you're going to want to go back to your space. You're going to take your parchment or plastic, throw that away. Get rid of your cutting board. Throw that in the sink. It's all had raw chicken on it. And you're going to want to grab some sort of like a soap or sanitizer. If you have Clorox wipes, those work. I just have an all-purpose little cleaner. I'm going to spray on everything. And you're going to want to wipe it down because you don't want little chicken bits everywhere. All right. So the other thing you're going to want to do is your tongs have been touching raw chicken if you're working with chicken. So you're going to want to wash them before you plate your salad and stuff. So you're going to use them to get your salad out. And at the same time, you can wash your hands, but you probably have a little bit of chicken on them maybe if you haven't washed them yet. So, nice clean towel. Right, tongs out. There we go. Make a second piece of chicken. So with your pan that you cooked your chicken in, while it's still a little warm, you have two things you can do. One, I'll walk you through in a little bit, but right now what you're going to want to do is add some water. Because if you add some water to your pan right now while it's warm, all of the little brown bits that are stuck on, most of them are going to float off. It's less scrubbing for whoever's doing the dishes. And I can show you that real quick. You just put a little water in there, you give it some swirl. You can take your tongs to try to get the little bits if you want to. But the more of your pan you get, the more of it will come off. And just that couple of seconds of running some water in there, the bottom of the pan is already shiny. And so I really only have to scrub the edges. It's a lot less work. Right. So you're going to want to grab your chicken or tofu, whichever you're working with, your salad, your dressing, and we're going to get ready to plate. So we're going to start off with the tofu. When I plate the tofu for the salad, because it's not as wide as the chicken, I like to fan it a little bit like this and take, like, say, 3 pieces, stack it really nicely so people can see it, and it looks like you put a lot of time and labor into it, which you did. And then take your salad, set your salad off to the side. And make sure when you're doing your salad, a lot of your toppings are going to float to the bottom while it's set or while you stir it, which is good. Because what I usually do when I'm plating multiple is I'll try to get the salad greens onto each plate. And then I'll go through and evenly distribute the toppings across the top. Okay. Now my wife loves cheese, so I end up putting Parmesan cheese on most things, and especially with this salad, it adds just a nice little touch to the outside. It adds a little bit of flavor, a little bit more salt flavor to it, and it just looks nice. Now when I do tofu, this is usually how I present it. So it's nice, you can see the coloring, and you have the salad, and it's all set up on the side. With the chicken, like I already spoke to John about. Now I forgot to mention this, you can do it with the tofu. I like to drizzle a little bit of dressing on my chicken. It just adds a little bit more moistness to it. It's already going to be tender as heck, and it just adds a little bit more flavor. So you're going to want to center your piece of chicken on your plate. Grab your greens. You're going to want to put them across the top in almost a line. The nice thing about the salad part is if you notice that you didn't measure enough greens or toppings, you can always make a few more, cut it out, toss it with a little bit more dressing and put it on the top. It's a nice, easy way to deal with it. And again, I like to add a little bit of cheese. I'm using Parmesan. You can use any hard cheese. Asiago goes amazing with this, with the balsamic flavor and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You have dinner. And it was, when you're doing it at home, it'll be a little bit quicker sometimes than what has happened. Yeah, once you get it down packed, Now, I mentioned before that when you're done with your chicken or your tofu, you'll have a little brown flecks in the bottom of your pan. Let me tilt that up a little bit. We're done cooking. Side thing.
Oh my gosh. In theory.
There we go. Now you can see me again. So with your pan, when it has all that little brown flecks in the bottom, if you're not doing a salad, you can pan-sear your chicken and toss some thinly cut veggies in there. Some onions and garlic, and peppers, zucchini, summer squash. I did this last night. And while your chicken is sitting on your plate resting, your veggies are cooking. You add a little bit of white wine or lemon juice to the pan, some herbs, and then you have a nice pan sauce with some cooked veggies. And you can put some pasta or rice down, you put your chicken on it, and then you pour your veggies and sauce right across the top of it. It's a nice way to make a quick dinner. I've done it many of times. This technique is very versatile. The pan searing, if you're working with like, it's pretty much the basis of most what they call scallopini style dishes. So veal piccata, you take your piece of veal, you cut it thin, you pound it. That time you use the spiky bits because the veal can hold up to it. You then pan sear it, you add some stuff to your pan, you make a sauce with, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I'm blanking on it. I believe it was capers, lemon, some butter, a little bit of white wine, I want to say, and then you pour that across the top of it. Forgive me for the recipe slip up, but chicken marsala is made pretty similar. You take your chicken, you put a little flour in it, and then you pan cook it like you just did. You can then add some marsala wine, some mushrooms, a little pat of butter, which is about a tablespoon, and then you have a nice marsala sauce to put across your chicken. It'll amaze everybody that you can do all of these dishes pretty quickly, and they'll be like, oh my God, where'd you learn how to cook? That's an awesome thing. I didn't think I could get dinner that fast. But yeah, this is a great technique that lends itself to many different things. And yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Well, I think it would be fun to show off everyone's plating.
That would be nice.
Here we got some of this. Boom.
Nice.
Nope.
You guys are ahead of me a little bit, so I don't know my.
Okay. So that's the nice thing about this dish is it you know, you can go at your own pace.
Ooh,
I like it. Awesome. I know there were a couple of people who were just listening along, learning how to do it. I don't know if we posted the pictures of the example dishes of like what the chicken might look like and what the pasta version of it might look like. I don't actually have them saved to my computer at the moment. They're on my phone, so I can't really share them. But yeah, Casey, did I send those to you? Maybe.
I think you may have sent me one, and I totally spaced on putting it anywhere.
That's okay.
But it looks gorgeous. What you recreated tonight.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So, if anybody has any questions about this, other cooking dishes or techniques or any of that kind of stuff, I'm willing and able to answer questions.
So this is where I end the recording and we switch to the very informal, like, all right, let's eat our food and we can go over any questions and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Goodbye, everybody.